Test.
So it looks like we are live, and they're able to broadcast and stream, so I think we'll get started at this point in time. So I'd like to call to order the meeting of the February 24th Water Commission at 3:45. Technical problems been resolved now, and we can broadcast online. So the first thing I would like to do is to take roll call. So I'm going to start with online. Can you tell us who's online?
This is Evan Ela. I'm in attendance.
Okay, Evan's online, good. Any other commission members? Nope, good. With that, at this point, we'll take roll call inside. So if you just give us your name and say here as you go down the mic, that'll be great.
Tricia Bernhardt, present.
Sean Tonner, present.
Clark Hamilman here.
Roger Hudson here.
Jack Hilbert here.
Don Langley here.
Mickey Conway present.
James Eklund, present.
Okay, so we have majority of the board. We do have plenty of members to move forward. We do have two members here that we don't even have their alternates in here. That's Jim Maris and Harold Smethels, but we'll work on that in the future. So at this point in time, I think we will move on to the next item, which is approval of the meeting minutes from the January 27th meeting. So if anybody have any corrections or changes they would like to propose? Seeing none, look for a motion to approve.
So moved.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay.
Aye.
We have, I think it was just a delay. Aye. Opposed, nay. Abstentions? We're good to go, it passes. Moving on, now we move into the next item, which is commissioners have asked us to provide any comments, if you have them, on two items. So referral items here are the Pinery Village 1, First Amendment, and we have Stone Creek Ranch filing, First and Second Amendment. What I would like you to do, please, filing 1, Second Amendment, make sure if you have any questions or make a comment on one, please identify which one and provide your name and information. Any comments? Any comments, Evan? Nope,
No.
we have no comments, so if you would report back to the commissioners, there's no comments, okay? At this point, I think it's a long time coming. I think we're all very happy we're here at this point. I would just like to caution the board on a couple of things. Just remember, as we move forward and we start going, and please do feel free to ask questions, so we can all feel good and comfortable about the direction that we're going. But I do want to make it clear, too, that if we start saying, well, why didn't you, or can you add, or can you do this, those are equate to what's called a change order. And if we're going to change the scope, usually that has a dollar bill sign associated with it. So we just have to keep that in context. The staff will have to address that because we need the staff to manage this scope for us. We're not here on a daily basis. And so if the staff does that, then if there are any changes, then they'll have to manage that process and then see what those changes to the current scope and contract would entail, how much cost that would be. So I just want to have you keep that in mind as we move forward. So with that, anybody have any questions before we begin? No. Well, I would like to call on and see if we have a representative from Forsgren who's going to kick us off. And please go through your little agenda. We all have one about their presentation. And pull that out, and then we'll follow through on that. And that's the agenda and the items that we're going to be talking about today.
And this is Katie for staff, if you don't mind.
Please.
What's going to be presented to you today is an outline of services that does include all the optional services. The Board of County Commissioners approved a contract that has enough funding for all the optional services that were presented in the RFP response. So that'll be part of what you do see today. I just wanted to make sure that everybody was clear on that.
Okay, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Mike Warsack. I'm with Forsgren, and we're really excited to be here today and to get started on this water plan for Douglas County. We're going to be going through some introductions and then of our project team, and then we'll also be going through our scope of services and talk a little bit about some of the goals and the purpose of the plan. And we want to talk about stakeholders and focus groups also as we're going through it today. So to introduce our team we have here today, and just by the way, Will Koger, who was here in the original presentation to you, he had a pre-scheduled vacation and couldn't be here today, but he'll be back for future meetings for sure. He'll be the overall project manager. And Ann Kuchenmeister, to my right here, she is with Michael Baker International. She'll be heading up the public engagement and outreach portion of the work. And Ted Hyde will be heading up the land use policy analysis. And then Bill Franzak with LRE Water, to my left here. He's our groundwater specialist, so he's be carrying the big technical load on this analysis. So as far as the purpose and the goal of this water plan, which I know you all know, but we always like to just state that in the very beginning of a kickoff meeting like this, is we'll be analyzing the water supply and estimating the water demands throughout the county and different pieces of the county, incrementally over, I think we said 2030, 2040, 2050, and of course current as well, and looking at that throughout the county, and then identifying if there's any gaps between supply and demand, and it could be different places have gaps and some don't within the county, so we'll be looking at it in detail. And then making recommendations or identifying potential considerations for the commission to look at that would be strategic measures to be able to close any gaps that we do have, or if there are no gaps, that'd be great, of course, if there are no gaps, but we'd still make recommendations to improve the sustainability of the water supplies long term. We'll be looking at coming back to the Water Commission periodically throughout the process. We'll look at the schedule later on, but it's going to be probably roughly every couple months, maybe every other meeting roughly, maybe 2 to 3 months depending on exactly how the timing of everything goes. And we're looking at a total of a 1.5 year process to finally get us to the end of the water plan. Also looking at a lot of public engagement and Ann will be talking about that in more detail, but that's definitely an important component that we know is important to the board, to the commission, to be able to make sure we solicit input from the public. Any questions? And we also, of course, would like your feedback on everything today and then throughout the process. So is there anything that you would like to provide back to me right now regarding just the purpose and the goals of the water plan? Okay. All right. Well, I'm going to turn it over to Ann then to kind of kick off our scope of services, and she'll be talking about the public engagement and outreach.
Thank you. Hi, everybody. All right, I like that I'm phase 0 in this, very foundational. So for the public, oh, excuse me. Okay. For the public engagement, we're going to structure our public engagement outreach and strategies so that we're achieving the goals behind the questions that are going to be informational in this plan. And by that, I mean, what do we need to answer in order to implement future recommendations, refine current policy and regulation, and understand where the priorities of the community and the stakeholders align. So the questions and activities that we come up with in partnership with you all will be tailored to help us get to those next phases of implementation and acting on the recommendations that come out of this plan with a solid foundation of understanding the community and stakeholder priorities. So with that in mind, we are going to be offering engagement opportunities that are both digital and in person to try and reach a really broad cross-section of the community and understand their perspectives. Starting with the digital components, we're going to work with Douglas County and their communications staff to first have a landing page on Douglas County's website specific to the project that we can bring people to. So we're connected directly with Douglas County. We're also going to offer an online engagement hub using a platform that's called Social Pinpoint. It offers a lot of different functionality that helps us get responses about things like trade-offs or traditional surveys or opportunities for people to sign up for project updates and a bunch of functionality that we can bring in to really get a better understanding of what people are thinking as we progress. We're also going to be packaging up information for social media and newsletter and other e-blast platforms so that the county can put that out on their platforms. So the face of that information will be the county, but we'll provide all of the content behind it and tailor it to the project and get that out. We'll also be looking to stakeholders to help us push that information out and amplify it after we've posted it. So working with stakeholders, we'll talk more about them in a moment, and you all, once we've posted those things, we want to share that with people who we know are champions for the project so that they can help extend our web of information as it goes out into the community. So then one last digital piece. So when we're thinking about the public meetings, we have 3 of them planned. The initial one happens earlier in the project, and we're going to be showing the schedule a little later on, which will lay out all these activities I'm mentioning, so that'll give like timeline clarity. But the initial public meeting is currently planned to be virtual. Working with the county, we can transition that to hybrid as well, because we understand that there might be an expectation there and there's capacity to do that. That one is going to be more informational in nature. We really want to help educate people on what is it we're intending to do. We're going to be sharing a lot of information. We're also going to be explaining how they can stay involved, where they can find updates, how they can provide additional input as we progress. But that one will be a little bit front-loaded so that we're kind of building that foundation of awareness in the community of this is happening, this is what it is, this is how to stay involved with it. We're also planning to have stakeholder groups and focus groups. So to define those two, with the focus groups is where we're going to be looking at topic specific. Initially, I'm thinking potentially private and or community well owners as a potential focus group that we want to have a more in-depth conversation with at a couple of key points in the project. And then another one might be your larger water users, so unique groups or the water suppliers. So if we want to bring in the water suppliers to talk to them at key points, here's what we're seeing in existing conditions. Does this compute with how you all are seeing reality on the ground? Maybe again, before we get too far into talking about recommendations, for example, where they can give us a gut check on how they're feeling about those. The stakeholder group, we have scheduled for more frequent touch points with that group, and I'm envisioning a diverse group of stakeholders, so we're going to have a lot of different various perspectives in the room where we can have touch points with them frequently throughout the project and hear that feedback from a broad cross-section, but in more of a dialogue setting. So it's a little different than your public meeting where you're having short interactions with many people, but a little more robust with that group. And that brings us to our last 2 public meetings, which we're anticipating in person and to be in different geographies of the county. So we're getting both, 2 sections of the county where we might have different perspectives, more urban or rural, and offering that opportunity to people come and have a dialogue with us, hear what recommendations are on the table, help us refine those recommendations, hear their reactions to them, get their questions again about existing conditions. So we hope then to wrap this up with an engagement summary in the report. That will share what we heard, how it was provided to us, how it informed the recommendations and outcome, and where the community's priorities hopefully align with the outcomes of the study. So that's my engagement plan. Happy for questions or to answer any other.
Any questions? And please, when you are called on, give your name so that we have it on the record, okay? That would be great. So Sean?
Sean Tonner. As far as the outreach to the various stakeholder groups, I see, and I think you mentioned, well owners would be a key one. Do you guys have a database of all the well owners when we go to message out to them? Because I know they'd be keenly want to be kept up to date, and they'd probably be more engaged than most folks.
Don't, but I imagine through permitting potentially at the county that would be available.
Can you address the mic? We got to get it on record.
Sorry. Tricia Bernhardt. I do have such a list. It came from the Division of Water Resources. It lists all of the individual well owners in the county. And so I can help you with that list if you need help.
Thank you.
James?
Yeah, James Eklund. So I think this team worked with El Paso County and Arapahoe County, and
Correct,
maybe
yep.
Albert. And I'm just wondering, was your outreach similar in those efforts? And did you have any kind of lessons learned as you kind of traveled that road that you're going to try and employ here?
Yeah, that's a good question. So yes, we worked with both El Paso and Arapahoe, and it was slightly different, each of those. We didn't do we did have a stakeholder group in Arapahoe, and in El Paso, we did not have focus groups in either of them. We did a similar, for Arapahoe, the public meeting strategy was similar. El Paso, it was different. Digital footprint was different platforms in each. So there's some similarities. I would say lessons learned, and this is pretty consistent with engagement. I do a lot of public engagement, is that what gets people's attention in each jurisdiction is going to vary, right? So some places, people are more plugged into paying attention to the county on a digital platform. In some places, it's more a mailer or flyer or in person. And so it seems like from my initial communication with the staff and the communication team that the outreach strategies they have are pretty effective digitally here. And so I think that you're going to get a strong response that way. That's probably the biggest lesson learned, is just how do you get people to pay attention to the issue of the day when it's a slightly invisible one for many, right? So it's not that there's a traffic backup on the road. So I think with the digital platforms that are here, I'm hopeful that we'll see a really solid response from what I've initially heard from staff. So.
And this isn't a question so much for you, but maybe for the county staff. Do you have a read on like water plan grant funding for assisting with some of this?
Good question. Just early timing.
This is Katie for staff. Yes, we do. One of the informational items attached to the agenda is an overview of the grants that we plan to start applying for.
Got a whole page.
Perfect.
Saw you coming.
That's a great question.
Roger?
Roger Hudson, I've got two questions for you. One is the digital component. And so Caroline may be one of the ones that need in the room for this. The digital component, I agree, very important. You see that front-facing passive? Is it a dialogue? Is there a place for the viewer to be able to leave comments, to dialogue with polling? What do you see with that? Is it just information only? Is there, how do you see it?
Yeah, so with that platform social pinpoint that we have, we can offer a lot of different ways for people to provide feedback. So we can put questions out. They can respond with polling. There's also, it has a lot of different tools that embed into it, basically, that we can switch out, adjust, change as we kind of go through the process. So I think it's pretty interactive. The social media stuff is more of just the outreach to build awareness, but the digital engagement platform should be more interactive in people being able to provide feedback on that.
And have you envisioned it to be, I guess, is what my question is.
Oh, yeah.
I'd love to see it be interactive. Is
Yeah.
that what you're planning to do?
Yes, yeah, we're
Awesome.
planning to use it. So we're hoping to get early on input in kind of like priorities and preferences around what we're seeing for opportunities, maybe for conservation or for even understanding of what's the current water landscape within the county. And then later on, we can use this again to get a gauge on how people are responding to some of the recommendations, what their concerns are, any kind of gaps in information that we need to fill in or misunderstandings we're seeing. So things like that.
And I don't want to speak for the board, but I think from what I have seen and experienced is we don't really want our stakeholders and focus groups, as you put them, to just be listened to. We'd like to actually have their remarks and their viewpoints incorporated into the water plan. How do you envision having them come in or taking their statements, their views? How do you see them being incorporated once you've heard them into the plan, actually? How are you going to weave it into the plan?
So if we can phase the engagement initially to get direction on higher level thoughts like priorities, preferences, concerns, right? So prior to getting to recommendations and understanding what the technical data is, if we can get some direction on what those things are, that can then help us refine our early building out of what are the regulations, policies, priorities that we want to put on the table for reaction. So we'll get that early higher level feedback. We'll then come back and provide education on what the data is showing. Building out those recommendations, we can ask them again where their level of support is, what are their concerns, how feasible would this be for them to implement, what is the gap for them to implement something. I could give an example of like landscaping regulations. Let's say you want to xeriscape your lawn. You're really interested in that. However, you don't know, you're not a technical expert in landscaping, so what's the gap in information? So we can kind of get down to that level of like, your community is highly interested in this, but in order for them to achieve this, and this are the gaps that need to be filled either through incentives or policy updates or something like that. So I think we kind of go back a couple times as we build information and then show how that builds towards the final recommendations.
Right, that's very helpful, thank you.
Any more questions? Evan, any questions? Nothing? Okay. A curiosity question. So you talked about having well users and private well users. So how do you also then, just as a curiosity, so I'm assuming either the private well user also means like water providers?
So you have community wells, right, where you have multiple users on a single larger scale well or an individual well, and that's what I meant to say is, are you going to have, and they might have separate issues, right, managing a community well versus managing your individual well. So I don't know that the correct answer is to put them together or not.
Right.
The issues might be separate, but I didn't mean to say, I'm sorry, I lost the word you said, but what I intended to say was community well users or individual well users as a group that we might be interested in talking to.
Okay, no, I think you've answered my concerns. That make sure that we didn't exclude like water provider communities of interest because they're not a well user. They don't have their own individual wells.
I think,
so.
yeah.
So you are addressing that at the same time.
Yeah, I think the water providers could probably be their own additional group.
Right. Okay, great. Any other questions? Ma'am, it's yours.
Thank you.
Good afternoon. Bill Franzek with Ellery Water. I'm going to cover phase one, though Ellery's not going to do all the work on phase one. We're working in combination with Forest Green as well. But it's the water supply and demand analysis. It's kind of the meat and potatoes of what we're doing here. Way we're going to focus on this is we're going to cut it up into 3 areas. And the first one's going to be data collection. That's really the biggest key on trying to get information and how we can look at it. So we're going to collect data from the county, whether it be electronically or if there's reports from DWR, obviously, wells, Denver Basin, adjudications, water levels that are out there, decrees, et cetera, to kind of really understand what's out there. USGS, what they've done in the area, water districts, water providers, community well, municipal sub-districts, whatever they may be, try to get information from there. What we've done in the past in other counties is develop a questionnaire, kind of just very general, using their public information. What is going on? What's your expected demand? And usually we get pointed to, well, we have a conservation plan or we have a water development plan that we've put together as a water provider or something along that line that we can review as a public data. CWCB, we're going to go to on their 1051 data. So any water providers that provide over 2,000 acre-feet of water, we'll collect that information as well. State demographer as well, I'll work through all that. We're going to collect and evaluate that data and really kind of figure out in the county itself, what zones should we be looking at? Right now, a kind of an easy zonal breakup is you got the western area, which is the mountainous area, the fractured area, fractured granite. You got the marginal area and you got the central basin. Is that going to be the best way to look at this going forward? Once we get this data plotted and put into our GIS system, maybe there'll be some changes in how we look at the data. I'm not saying change the regulation, but maybe it's urban versus non-urban or whatever it might be, keeping in focus that we are going to be looking at that unincorporated area of the county. We won't be going in and telling Parker, hey, you got to get your own water right. You got to do this. That's well within their jurisdiction. We'll let them do that. We will be summarizing their data based upon their publicly available information, but they have their own jurisdiction on how to deal with things. Then we're going to just tabulate and visualize that data into an interactive GIS model that, folks can then utilize. And obviously, we'll be bringing this back to the commission and say, is this the data that we want to present? Do we not want to present it this way? How do we want to look at it? And it's been a very powerful tool because it's very clear when you look at some of these interactive maps of where those subdivisions are that are all on individual all-out wells, where those subdivisions are that have the central well system and obviously the water provider boundaries. And you can go directly into there. You may have a subdivision that has a bunch of individual all-out wells in the Dawson, for example. And they're saying, we're running out of water. It's subdivision A over here that's sucking everything dry. Well, when you go in there, you can start looking at individual all-out wells, see how they were constructed. A lot of the issues we found, which makes sense, back in the 1970s when some of these wells were drilled, they weren't fully completed to the base of the aquifer, or they were put in with a 4-inch well. And I got to move water up from 1,000 feet. I can't find a permit, I can't find a pump that's going to move the water 1,000 feet in a 4-inch well. So there are certain issues that we can evaluate using state engineer data and construction records to really give an idea to the commission and to the county about really where are those issues. Is it really subdivision A sucking the water dry, or is there a different issue associated with why water is not readily available in folks' wells when we're out there? So that's going to be part of that information gathering. Then phase 2 is obviously the groundwater plan. We're going to really dive into that with the data that we get from the state engineer's office, focusing on the Denver Basin. That's really kind of a key water source here in the county. But we're not going to forget about the fractured granite up in the mountains. Problem with that is most of that needs to be augmented. So we're going to have augmentation plans associated with that. In the marginal areas, again, probably a lot of it's going to be augmentation plans with alluvial water because you're going to be in the non-tributary zone. One thing we've seen in the past is we've seen USGS put together some of these digital models, which are great, but they don't take into consideration the state engineer's rules and regs when it comes to non-tributary or non-tributary, full replacement, 4%. So where we start looking at that as well to really see how that's going to play out in the county. We are going to look at the surface and alluvial water, and then we're going to focus on Denver Basin using the Petra model that we've used in the past, and the state's really liked it. And what that is really, if you've ever been to the state engineer's office and try to figure out, the geologic framework underneath the ground, they literally take the geophysical logs, put them up on a wall, and try to draw a line between them. And they're very good at what they do, but it's not as fast. We now put that in Petra, being able to figure things out with elevations and really get a good idea of what the subsurface looks like based upon stitching together a lot of these geophysical logs or other types of information that we see that can come up from USGS or from, if there's oil and gas or mining or anything else that has data that has some of these geophysical logs, we can get that put in there to really get a good snapshot of what's underneath the ground as a tool. We then take a look at that based upon what we've seen is how water production will come out of the ground, typically based upon how many ohms that we see in those geophysical logs, and compare that with the state engineer's data. We can't mess with the legality of, you got 100 years of aquifer life, here's our specific yields of 20, 17, 15, so on and so forth. But we can't take a look at it and say, the state gave me 100 acre feet. Am I really going to get 100 acre feet out of the water, out of the ground? Or is it going to be something different? Am I going to get the rate that the state says we can get? Until we actually look at the data, we just don't know. In Arapahoe County, for example, it was about 60%, which is what the usable amount of water is, about 60% from an economic standpoint than what the state engineer gives you. Now, we obviously have had arguments where people said, well, I can put in 15 wells and get out my allocation. Yeah, you can, but is that economically prudent? And two, that doesn't take into consideration well-to-well interference. So, there is obviously some assumptions in there. But that's something that we can look at, too, to give the county those recommendations on when we look at a subdivision, is it really going to last 100 years? Is it going to last 200 years? Or are we only going to get out 60 years of water? We get the comment all the time, why is the state engineer put in there maybe 100 years? It may not be 100 years, we don't know. Well, groundwater's not uniform. It's difficult to really kind of it's not a big bathtub of sand. It's a lot of other things in there. So that's what we'll be working on in the groundwater study. And again, we'll summarize all the work that we've done, tabulate all the data. So we have a real good understanding of how much water's coming out of the Denver, how much the water's coming out of the Dawson. Is it non-tributary, not non-tributary? What does that all look like? Give a picture of what's that about. And then finally, we'll just get into the water supply demand analysis, where we work with the state demographer's data to look at population estimates. work with water providers on what they're thinking of population estimates, seeing if there's data gaps, what might be there. Kind of figure out, a lot of water providers have an estimated use, or they have data on how much use is being done by household. Like City of Denver, I believe right now is about 150,000 gallons per year per household on average of what's being used, and that's ballpark a third of an acre foot. Other folks are different. Look at that data, tabulate it out, figure out what is a reasonable amount of water per household, per commercial use. Is there outside irrigation? Is there other things to look at? And kind of start looking through how much water do we have? What are the uses? Are there data gaps? And are there policies that we can put in place to make that go further? A good example in Arapahoe County was City of Inglewood. They're very close on how much water they have based upon the data they've given us with surface water and their estimated population data on whether they're going to have enough water in 2050. So they've made decisions. We've got to start putting in conservation to close that gap. So those are the types of decision-making we'll have when we get through that water demand analysis to really kind of give the county that thinking about what do we need to do to make sure we have water going forward. So that's kind of the schedule and how we're going to do that. And obviously, we'll be bringing it back with different data and maps for you all to look at, making sure we're on the right path.
Okay, any questions?
Bernhardt, you mentioned making sure that you had an understanding of the Dawson and the Denver. I assume you also mean the Arapahoe and the Laramie Fox Hills.
Correct.
Correct? Thank you.
Correct. We're going to go through all the way down. One of the, that was one of those optional things, but yes, we're going to go down to the Arapahoe and the Fox Hills as well and take a look at it. There is good data that we're aware of and that we've been able to put in some of our maps as well in the southeastern part of the county. And we're still looking at seeing how we can get some of that Fox Hills data and Arapahoe data kind of the northeast part of the county. But as we know, the Denver Basin is kind of all over the place out there with the Dawson all the way down to Fox Hills. So it's just a matter of pulling that data and looking at it. But yes.
Don.
Yeah, Don Langley. So the best I can tell, you're the only people I've seen using this Petra model. Haven't seen it used anyplace else. It almost looks to me like it's maybe a transplant from oil and gas. So could you just give me a little bit more feel on why Petra and why you're committed to it?
Yeah, I mean, we talked to the state about this as well. I mean, it's really just taking the geophysical data that is filed with the state for almost all those large capacity wells, or dealing with oil and gas geophysical logs or what have you, and synthesizing that data to really make to give you a better visual representation that's out there, based upon the logs themselves, what the ohm meters are, whatever they may be. I'll be honest, there's a lot better people that know the Petra a lot better than I do. But yeah, we do a lot of, we basically take that data and synthesize it so we can get an idea of what's going on versus taking just the actual geophysical logs and trying to map it with a pen. It's all computerized to be able to make it work based upon where the different readings are on those geophysical logs based upon elevation and what aquifer is. And we have sophisticated folks that can then take a look at that. And the state really likes it. I mean, one of the things that we've come up with is down in, I'm trying to think where it was, might have been in either southwestern Albert or maybe it was even southeastern Douglas, but the state came up and said, well, you got X amount of water based upon our analysis looking at the geophysical logs. As we ran through Petra and walked through other logs in that, we found another 200 feet of saturated thickness. And I believe it was in the Arapahoe Aquifer. I don't have that right on top of me. But it's just a more sophisticated way of really analyzing those geophysical logs. And yes, it does, and it has spun out of the oil and gas industry. It's not as precise as some of that sonic work that they do to do that, but we can use that as well, depending upon where you are in the state. And they have done some of that sonic work, and we can figure out the upper layers as well through 3D modeling. So, but it just takes all available data and puts it into a database and able to work through it. And it gives you a good cross-section, north, south, east, west, of what's kind of going on there.
James?
Thanks, James Eklund. Do you anticipate using multiple growth scenarios with the work you're doing with the demographer's office on growth rates in the county? And
we have done that in the past with, whether it be high growth, medium growth, low growth. what we've done in the past there is also work with the water providers on what they think is going to happen as well. When in Arapahoe County, we had Dr. Cog that said, here's what we think is going to be our growth. State demographer was different. And so we started using those as the boundaries about, state demographers was less than Dr. Cog. So we said Dr. Cog's going to be the aggressive growth. The lower growth is going to be what the state demographer said. And we've also noticed that when we started looking at state demographer data before 2020, there was a lot more population estimates from the state demographer than it was when it came out of 2020. So we're going to look at all that data, but to answer your question, yes, we're going to try to look at, are these different scenarios of accelerated growth versus medium growth versus low growth based upon which data we have.
Anybody else? Questions? Evan?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, this is Evan Ela. I have a question about, it sounds like you will use the Petra model to develop a pretty good, we hope, accurate topography or topology of each of the layers of the Denver Basin. But will you also have an output that's I guess what you might call a heat map that will show where the greatest amounts of withdrawal are occurring and at what rates, and be able to project from that through time?
We can look at that. It really doesn't look at it depends on where the data is, obviously. We've looked at heat maps in the past regarding water level declines, whether it be the piezometric head or actually the water level declines that are in the aquifer, and put a heat map together that way. We can do heat map on basically withdrawals of the different aquifers. Where is there a lot of Denver Basin or Denver aquifer water being withdrawn? It doesn't, the Petra model really doesn't get us that. That comes from other data sources, but that's something we can, with the recommendations from the commissioners, we can definitely take a look at. It's just looking at that data, what's out there. Because there's a lot of subdivisions out there that would be going into the county and saying, we're going to use the Denver aquifer as our individual on-lot wells. And 90%, if not more, of that subdivision were using Denver. A few might have dropped down to the Arapahoe, but not very, very much. And just as an example. So we could take a look at that heat map in that area, how much Denver water is being used in that area versus other folks, to see if there's a correlation on water level measurements or something along that line.
Okay.
Any other questions? Hands up. I do have one. It's kind of a curiosity question. So when you're looking at these populated areas, one of the things I was just recently using AI, I was trying to figure it out, was the conflict area or coning effect on highly populated areas where you have individual wells. I mean, obviously you have just lots, you're not going to have an individual well, but you have some areas, and I was trying to wonder where in Douglas County has the greatest conflict due to coning concerns and individual well interference. And so do you guys get into that?
Yeah, we can definitely show that. And it's something that will pop out on those interactive GIS maps where you see that high population of certain individual lot wells in a certain area. Typically, we see that associated with some sort of subdivision that was earlier in the year, approved, or from a deeper aquifer, because most other individual lot wells have to be on 35 acres or greater in size, unless it's a pre-72 lot, and those are sometimes somewhat rare. But yes, you can see that right away once you plot all those wells on the GIS map. You can see where those pockets are of highly dense, if you will, individual on-lot wells.
So that's population density. So you're assuming then that they're experiencing, because of the density, that they're probably experiencing some type of coning conflicts or anything like that?
Could be. We just have to look at the data. I don't know the answer to that question right today, but yeah, we could look at that and see where it comes up with.
Great, thank you. Anybody else?
Mr. Chairman, this is Evan Ela again. Just had a follow-up question. You mentioned on the demand side that maybe City of Denver's down to maybe a third of an acre foot per single-family house with outside irrigation. But do you plan to do any kind of analysis or comparison in Douglas County among the different water providers and individual well users to try and get an idea of the range and the current demands that are occurring in those different situations?
The answer to that question is yes, with the individual, with the providers. For sure, we're going to take a look at that, depending upon public available data. A lot of the providers do like have comp plans, or they have some sort of demand analysis or something where we can get some data about, says, okay, our average household uses X. And yes, we will tabulate that data to really take a look at what various jurisdictions are doing on a household basis or on a commercial basis, that type of thing. Individual wells, it gets very difficult, and the reason is we just don't have meter readings from them. You'll get a well permit, but the one thing, the bulk of the well permits, unless it's household use only well permits, are right around an acre foot. So we can 90%, if not higher, are less than an acre foot of water for individual residents. Now that does change. We all know it changes, but that's what we've seen, at least from what's been permitted out there. And there obviously is a lot of household use only wells permits, and that's a third of an acre foot. Water inside the house only, no irrigation. So we can tabulate that data, which is what we will do.
Great, thank you. Anybody else?
Good.
Well, with that, oh, excuse me. Yeah, William?
Mickey Conway. On the point about the demand, are there any assumptions that are made or any historical analysis that's looked at how demand has changed? And so if you're setting sort of demand in the present day as you're projecting out 50 years, are there any assumptions that are applied to that analysis?
Yeah, great question. What we've seen working through these various counties is that there's been a lot of in-house, I would say inside the house conservations with toilets or what have you. You're not going to find a lot of savings there. It's really the outside irrigation. And where you can find out, is it bluegrass or can you do something else? That's where we've seen the big difference and the change over time, is that you're seeing more of that irrigation being taken off and more of that, xeriscaping type stuff. But then you get into the whole analysis of, do you want to have an island of a heat zone? If you don't have any trees or grass, it can get a lot hotter. So from the in-house use side of things, the analysis always has been is just taking a look at the shoulders from January through March and from September or from October through December. That really gives you your in-house use analysis for the most part. There is some outside irrigation, but that's pretty consistent. And then you see the bell curve when irrigation comes on. What we've seen in the past, that bell curve is starting to come down. Not as much outside irrigation. The in-house use has really been pretty consistent with all those fixtures that have been put in over the years. There always can be improvements, but.
Great, thank you. Anybody else? Well, sir, introduce your next speaker. Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Okay, thanks, everybody. And when we visited with you back in the summer, fall, I happened to travel south on 25 to get here and did so again today. And, that spot when you get just south of Lone Tree and you look off to the east of the interstate, and those subdivisions just seem to keep coming, right? They seem to keep coming. There's more earth, there's more graders, there's more bulldozers, there's more framing happening. So I bring it up because land use analysis and the effect on supply and demand will be a really important part of this analysis. So we spelled out in the proposal fairly briefly what we intend to do, but essentially working with staff from the county and starting really at the macro level with the county's comprehensive plan, and then taking a finer tooth comb to things like the zoning code, allowances for land uses, densities, things like that, really putting a spotlight on what the intent and the vision is for land use, land development in the county, 2030, 2040, 2050. What will be the best estimate of associated demand with that? And working closely with Bill, who just presented, really doing that kind of quantitative side-by-side analysis. Okay, here's what we project to be the demand based on the amount of new residential dwelling units, new commercial, new institutional coming online, and how does that stack up with what we know to be available supply under conservative estimates? And can that be sustained? And we might see a a notable available supply in year 2050. However, as Bill brought up in the example of Englewood, we may find very much a narrowing gap between the land use the county is envisioning for itself and what it can accommodate and the available sustainable supply. So I think if we do, through our analysis, really begin to see a narrow envelope, and a closeness between those two, working with you, working with staff, we can take a look at and give consideration to, Ann mentioned several recommendations. What are some things we can do from the land use side to really think proactively about a more sustainable supply? Is it a change potentially in zoning, okay, and the allowed lot sizes? Is it a potential, Bill mentioned this, but is it a potential change, either regulatory or strongly recommended landscaping ordinances or in the land development code? There's a variety of kind of levers we can use to collectively bring demand down over time. So we'll just have to see what the analysis is showing in terms of the estimated build out, associated demand, and then what we think we can do, and then importantly, what you as commissioners think is achievable. And then obviously going to the larger county commissioners, and politics plays a part here too, right? Not everybody is for the stick versus the carrot. Not everybody is for strong arm conservation, but not everybody is for changing, growth control, so to speak, in the interest of conservation. So those are the discussions we're just going to have, things we're going to have to look at, working with you. So that's in essence the land use analysis piece. Jack, it looked like you were about to ask a question. No? Okay. So that's in summary the land use analysis piece. Any questions?
Questions? Okay, I'll ask one.
Yeah.
So as part of this, are you going to come out with, looks like a recommended best practice for the staff and them to consider or something? I'm curious.
Yeah, potentially. And one, Jack, I'm thinking about, may I call you Jack or should I call you Commissioner Hilbert?
I could tell you a lot of things people call me, but Jack is fine, thank you.
Okay. I remember you from the Dr. Cog days. So one example could be, when we just finished with Arapahoe County, and overlapping with our process was a complete redo to their landscaping standards. In many ways, I think it does provide a good best practice or template for Douglas County to consider. So yes, that's an example of one where we may make a recommendation to that effect. Yeah.
Anybody else? Evan?
Yeah, I'm sorry, Chairman, but this is Evan. Eli, just had a follow-up question to that. Is that the only recommendation in Arapahoe County, that they change their landscaping requirements? Is that the only outcome from the water plan?
No, Evan, there were several more, and if you would like, we can get you a link to the final plan. It has several recommendations.
Okay, right. Thank you.
Yeah.
All right, I'm not seeing any questions. Okay, sir.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thanks, Ted. So after we go through all the analysis, I'm just kind of going to do that last phase of our scope of services, which would be actually developing the water plan itself. And we provided, I'm not sure if it's in your handout, but I know it's on the screen, we had a kind of an outline, or a preliminary outline of what we envisioned the plan to actually look like. And this can change obviously as we go through it. But and for most of these, and some will be lumped together, we'd be coming back to the Water Commission for input on each one, and then following that up with a technical memorandum that we'd be providing after we get your input back on it. And so we're envisioning, as you can see there on the screen, a public engagement portion of the report, and that would have a public engagement plan, I think that Ann mentioned, that would be one of the memorandums. We have the water providers description, but then also the next numbers 4 and 5, the land use and growth scenarios and the projected water demands. So we envision those kind of being combined together into one technical memorandum. The water supplies would be another one. Of course, the groundwater analysis will be a pretty significant technical memorandum that we would be issuing. Demands versus supplies and that gap analysis that we talked about, and then how to close that gap through the water management strategies. That would be another technical memorandum that we kind of combine together. And then the recommended policies would be the last technical memorandum. And so we envision those being about 6 total technical memorandums that would come back to you for input on at your regular meetings, and then follow that up with the actual memorandum. Any questions about that?
Don't have any questions. Anybody else have questions on that? No, sir?
Okay.
Oh, Don. Okay.
Yeah, Don Langley. So each one of those technical memorandums also results in a meeting between Forest Green Associates and the Water Commission to review those results. Am I correct?
Correct.
Yeah.
That's correct.
So there's these 6, you might have called them workshops. I can't remember exactly what you called them, that we would have specifically at each one of those points.
Right. It could be it'd be whatever you want. It could be a workshop. It could be your regular meeting. However you would want to do it. We had about 6 or 7 planned for it.
Okay. Okay, that's good for now. Thank you.
Clark?
Clark Hamelman. Everybody's memories are pretty short, but as I've talked to people recently, one of the issues that I would assume will come up in your public prioritization meetings.
Hey, Clark, can you grab the mic a little bit? I'm sorry.
One of the issues I assume will come up that hasn't been addressed, and I think we just need to think about it, how we want to respond to it, and that is the recent LA fires and the issue of not the gap analysis for the long term, but the gap analysis for right now. And I just think, that's something that maybe you've run into, but if you haven't, I think we probably are going to run into that.
Yeah, then that could be storage. That could be ability, the actual distribution system to get the water to the fire hydrants. You're right. We could get lots of questions about that, and I've heard that in other communities since the LA fires. So yes, I think that's something that we will need to be prepared to look at and address.
Anybody else? I do have another question. We've been talking a lot about well community, individual wells, et cetera. Are you also going to address renewable water supplies and sources, reservoirs, et cetera?
Yes, that's part of our scope too, and of course a lot of that will come from the water providers, but we're also looking to collaborate with the South Metro Water Supply Authority, which they're of course a key player in that renewable water and the wise water. So yes, that's part of what we'll be looking at as well.
Great, thank you. Seeing none, sir, move on to your next point.
So we'd like to just talk about the schedule for a little bit. Go up a little bit higher. So the first task we have out there, the project management. Sorry, I'm trying to get it so you can see everything. That second line item, the technical memorandums and water commission discussions, that's what we were just talking about. And so I know you can't see this. You can't see the dates now. Can I make this a little smaller? Yeah. Just so they can see the whole schedule and there you go. That's good. That's good.
Yeah, I don't want to do that too much.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. So as I said, we're looking at probably coming back about every couple months, probably that first one being at your April, late April meeting, and then maybe following up with the technical memorandum in May. And then I said about every couple months coming back to you with additional technical memorandums as we showed in that outline. I'm going to let Ann come up and talk a little bit about the public engagement schedule and how we have those laid out.
Okay, so I think I referenced most of this already, but the initial public open house you can see is front-loaded, right? And that was the one that we were talking about being hybrid and highly informational to share information with people and kind of set the foundation of awareness with the community. And then there's 2 additional open houses that are later, so looking after that, after existing conditions have been gathered and we understand what the supply is showing, what the demand projections are showing, and we want to kind of preview some recommendations and get that early feedback. How are people reacting to these? And then refine them and provide a final opportunity potentially to respond to them. Or the other option would be to take those 2 final public meetings, have them closer together in time, but focused on different geographies, but similar content. So as this progresses, we can talk about the timing for those 2, but 2 different strategies there for that. The stakeholder group, that was again that more diverse group of people that were coming back at multiple touch points in the room to get their feedback at project milestones. So understanding how they're feeling as we progress, and they allow us to course correct, refine, add to, really helping us adjust as we go on. And then focus group meetings are somewhat front-loaded so that we can understand as we're building out our information and kind of setting our foundation for understanding how are the water suppliers feeling about that. Is this landing well with also well users, and what's that kind of feedback we're getting before we're too far down the line of understanding there? Any questions on that portion? I think Don has one.
Any questions on public hearings, Don?
Yeah, Don Langley. I don't know if you said this at the beginning, but I'll ask it again now. Composition of the stakeholder group and the focus groups, is that in your scope to develop those groups and contact those people and put those together, or does that come over to us, or do we kind of do that hand in hand, or?
Yeah, good question. So my initial understanding is that we could get an initial list for you all to react to, working with staff and information that's already been populated. And so we can build that, get a reaction, see if we're missing any key players, and then proceed with coordinating with them is how I was planning to go about that.
Clark?
Yeah, Clark Hamelman, the public open houses and input seems to be all focused at the front end, kind of gathering the information. What's the plan for, at the conclusion of educating the public?
When it's completed?
Yeah.
So usually we'll post it, and by that point we've built a pretty good outreach list of people who have signed up for interest and have been following the project or attended things, and then we can notify them when the plan is done and available and talk about how it would be implemented in like our final correspondence to them. But we don't have a public meeting or anything planned towards the end.
I think something, even if we determine that maybe based upon the temperature of the community and different users, I think it's something we can address further, because we're talking a year and a half down the road. But I do fully understand, Clark. I think it's a good catch. Yeah, because somebody's going to want to say, hey, somebody close this loop for me here. Sean?
Sean Tonner. Yeah, I think the commissioners, the big commissioners, I think once the plan is culminated, I think they're going to want to bring in their digital team and public relations and outreach to get that out in the community as well. So.
Go ahead, ma'am.
And this is Katie for staff. Excuse me, I'm getting over a cold. Another piece of this is that final consideration on the adoption of the plan by the Board of County Commissioners will be a public meeting of some sort. So, there will be opportunities for public engagement through our public affairs office, online, through continued outreach, et cetera.
Yeah, I just don't want to lose that thought. I think we should, at the end of, what is that, third quarter, 26, we ought to have something that has an expectation that we don't just stick it on the shelf.
Yeah, I think we can revisit adjusting things, right, as the project progresses, and if you see
And that
that.
could be,
Yeah, that's
our
in-
responsibility, not necessarily yours.
I'm off the hook.
I think it's pretty robust personally. It's got 10 meetings scheduled just for public input, group input, et cetera. And then you've got the commission meetings also, so quite a bit. Thank you. Anybody else? Okay, Sean.
Sean Tonner, sorry, jumping a little ahead to water supply and demand analysis. I'm assuming since most of our renewable water comes from either Denver or Aurora, you all will be sitting down with them and figuring out the health of their systems and
Yes.
being able to deliver that water?
Yes, absolutely. They have the master meters, they have all that fun stuff that we've looked at in the past when we dealt with Arapahoe County as well, on how they've sent things out. So yes, we have pulled them in as well. I'm not sure if Aurora provides any water down in Douglas County as well, but we'd be working with them as well, just to make sure what that looks like. And what we've done in the past as well is with Aurora, Denver, and others, South Metro, because they do go across various county jurisdictions, really trying to get an idea of what they actually do, how much water they do actually send into the county versus what, they send to other counties. So it's probably not 100% precise, but yes, we definitely work with them on those meters and that amount of water coming in.
That's great. Yeah, in the case of Aurora, Roxborough, Wise,
Yep.
As well as Sterling Ranch are
Yep.
all beneficiaries of Aurora water.
Yep, exactly, yeah, so we'll definitely be including that data in there as well.
And actually, Aurora is in Douglas County, i.e., they have a community over in Gartrell, so.
Yeah, okay. And, we'll also look at as well, with the water providers, of course, are there other projects that water providers are looking at on bringing water from elsewhere? Like in Arapahoe County, they are looking at bringing water, all the way up from Brighton, which is in Adams County. How does that work out? Some of it gets a little bit interesting because there are current court cases being involved with some of that changes of water rights. So again, it's only publicly available data, and whatever the water providers want to have us look at. Obviously there are news out there about what, we know that Parker's looking at bringing water all the way from Sterling. Figuring, there are, and same with Dr. Koch is looking at some of these types of regional projects. We'll have short summaries of those about that could be another water supply coming into the county. But details of that, it's really, depends on where it is in the court, litigation, how it's being worked at. We won't touch any of that. That's all, that's all being done in the courts, but we'll try to get as best summary as we can.
Okay, any other questions? Okay.
Yeah, so going back to the schedule then, looking at that water supply and demand analysis, so we're just talking about probably finishing that up towards the end of the year, of this year. And then the land use policy analysis kind of would overlap with some of that and continue on into the spring, maybe early summer. And then, probably in that June, July areas where we'd be getting ready to have a draft to present to staff and coming back to the Water Commission with a preliminary draft to get additional input, and then a draft to the county commissioners, probably in that August range, July, August, and then again trying to shoot for adoption either late August or early September with the Board of County Commissioners. So that's kind of how we got the water plan laid out right now.
Any questions about the plan? Okay.
I know it can seem like a long time to get to that point, but there's a lot of information we have to gather, and if we do encounter any delays on getting information back from water providers, that could delay some of this. But we're hoping that we've got enough time budgeted in there to be able to account for all that.
Anybody else? Questions? Oh, James?
Last thing, James Eklund, you're going to get tired of hearing me say this, but what kept us from being a glossy report that sat on the shelf with the state water plan was measurable objectives. And at the end of this thing, we're going to have something that the public that you engaged at the start of it can keep score at home about how well we're all doing with implementing the thing. So just put a pin in that. If I don't say it, do me a favor and remind me to say it.
Okay, right. Thanks.
A man with many bruises and scars. Anybody else? Okay, sir, anything else?
The last item we have is just the stakeholders and focus groups, but I think we've talked about that quite a bit already. And as Ann mentioned, we'll be working with staff to get together a preliminary list of who specifically they will be, and so we can be able to reach out to them. And then, kind of our next steps are going to be starting to send out, getting the questionnaire finalized, working with staff on that, and getting that sent out to the water providers, start getting the data coming back in. And I know Bill will start working on the interactive map, right? Start gathering the information he needs from GIS and get rolling on that. And then, once we have the list established for the stakeholders, and actually even before that, Ann can start the outreach of actually, and working with the county staff to be able to get the notifications out for the public meetings that will be starting up in, I think maybe as early as May. We're planning on that first one.
Any questions? Questions from staff? Thoughts? All right, thank you so very much.
No,
We
thank you.
appreciate this. Finally, that's all I can say, finally. Okay. So let's move on our agenda. And the next item that we're going to take a look at now is the upcoming informational sessions. And so looking at this, what we've done, I want to thank everybody who contributed their thoughts, their ideas. I will tell you, it was broad. It was a lot. Some of it was really specific. Some was broader in nature. So trying to figure out what we've come together with. So Don and I met with staff, as we said we would, and then try to come up with a schedule then for what kind of informational sessions that we're going to have. The schedule that they gave us is going to be really good to help with that, because I think originally what we were looking at this schedule was that we were going to do like 45-minute, half-hour sessions at each meeting, but I think we're not meeting with Forsgren every week. I mean, every month. It's every other week. So I think it'll allow us to now have more topics that we can put up. Like in 1 week, we may have 2 topics instead of 1. So Don and I are going to have to revisit with staff, and we'll look at that. I do know that originally we have right now that we would like to move forward with is, and we're going to keep this list handy. And if you look, you have that list, what everybody turned in. So take a look at that. We came up with one in our first meeting to make sure that we would like to invite like Castle Rock, Mekarot, Dominion, and Parker Water to give us an overview on what's going on, what do they think, how things are going, or whatever. And we did have some talking points to help them in guiding some of that. As an example, Castle Rock just announced they're using some type of AI leak detection system, which is phenomenal. And I know Parker has a reservoir, and they have a digital reservoir that's farther away right now. But anyhow, so that's an example of things that I think are going to help us get an idea of what's going on, at least around the county. Mekarot, for those who won't remember, that's that Israeli water group that Harold has brought up a couple of times. So we thought we'd give them a chance to talk about their water conservation and what they have learned in some of their systems and the things that they do. And then obviously we have, like I said, the 3 water districts. We want to do too then is this list is not done. We're going to take that list, and what we would like to do is give us a chance to put it together. I don't want to put together an entire year's list, because things are going to change. They're just going to change. Once we get information from Forsgren and we have social issues, then I think we're going to have to modify that, or someone might suddenly say, hey, wouldn't it be nice? And then we need to discuss it, see who we have to reach out to and what we have to do. So just as an FYI, we have been moving forward on that, and we have been talking and have been meeting on that. So any questions? All right, the next item, if you look at item number 5, which is information items, not informational sessions, but under information items, attached you will find a 2025 legislative session summary, which gives me a great idea for one whole meeting. But somebody give us an update somewhere, somehow, what does all this mean that's happening? So we'll be looking for some resources to just explain to us so that everybody here at least gets it, what's happening. So probably hitting up the staff. They have a legislative session. I know we may be hitting up a member on the commission who might be familiar with a lot of these. So that'll be good, and then we can try to get some additional information out. You've been handed out also is an attachment that is the grant funding opportunities. There's 3 of them there. Staff is currently looking at applying for those grants, and we'll see what happens on those. Those are going to come from the county. So once the county has them, how they're deployed is going to be the county's, I think, responsibility and their control from that standpoint. Any question on information items? All right, member discussions. Anybody have anything they want to bring up, talk about, go to the public?
And this is Katie for staff. We do have planning commission in this room after 5 o'clock, just FYI. Thank you.
This is Sean Tonner. Duly noted. I'll be very quick. No, a number of us were at the Colorado Water Congress. Some of us for all 3 days, even online. I did too, in full disclosure. Don, I don't know how many days you were. 1? 3 back here. Okay, so we got 3 in the back. So anyway, big takeaway for me was there was a great discussion on the Colorado River and the fact that they believe 2027 will be the first call on the Colorado River. So that kind of was an interesting piece. James, you were there for quite a few days as well. So that was a big takeaway there. And everybody's looking for water. So
Define the call. It's a broad term. So who do you think is calling, California or who?
I'm punting to James.
Everybody thinks that. I'm pleased.
Great. This is James Eklund, and we only have 3 minutes. So can't even dip our toe in this, but if a call were to happen on an interstate basis, it would be from Arizona, California, and Nevada. But a lot would have to happen between a call and now for something like that to come to pass. Yeah, I noted that was an information session topic that you had down, and we can get into a lot of good stuff on that.
Okay.
The last thing I have, and I'll be very quick, is appreciate the funding, the grant identification. I was just going to note one more, which is CDPHE runs a source water assessment protection program called they call it the SWAP is the acronym. It's only like $5,000, but every bit helps, and it's for protection planning grant for water supply protection. So it's kind of goes in the vein of the wildfire, burn scar being around a reservoir or something like that. But I don't know what the cycle looks like if we're in it or past it, but that was the only thing I saw that wasn't on there. So.
Great. Thank you for that input. Anybody else? Well, with that, I think that was a very informative meeting. Thank you guys very much we've really been looking forward to that. And at this point, I think we'll adjourn our meeting at 4:58. The gift of time, 2 minutes. There you go.